The Lord of the Rings is one of the most popular and well-known fantasy stories of all time. The iconic world of Middle-earth that Tolkien created is filled with rich mythology and detailed fictional history. In this video, we take a look back at some of the most successful titles of the past that cover this fantastic and intricate world. Before we do that, a quick note. Since some multi-part titles are very similar in terms of gameplay and execution, we've combined them into a single entry for the sake of brevity. We have a lot to cover, so let's get right to it. Guardians of Middle-earth is a multiplayer online battle arena video game from 2012, developed by Monolith Studios and published by Warner Bros. The game includes the standard elements of a typical MOBA game, such as lane control, minions, heroes, and towers. Up to 10 players may split into 2 teams of 5 and choose from a pool of 36 Guardians from the Lord of the Rings franchise, including Gandalf, Sauron, and Legolas. We are not sure what the reason was, but some iconic characters from the movies, such as Aragorn, Gimli, and Boromir, are missing and were never introduced in the game. When the game was released, League of Legends and Dota established themselves as the 2 most successful MOBA games. Warner Bros. Saw an opportunity to join the hype and develop its own game in this genre, and Guardians of the Middle-earth was the result. However, both Dota and League are free to play, which was not the case with Guardians, where you had to pay for both the base game and all the DLCs. The decision to place players into different queues during matchmaking, depending on which DLC they had installed, was highly controversial and resulted in a terrible online experience for many players. This segregation of the player base made it difficult for players to find matches and often led to long wait times. And even if you were able to join a match without much trouble, the online matches were often filled with bots, which ultimately led to the game's downfall. In April 2019, Guardians of Middle-earth was removed from the Steam store page and is no longer available for purchase. The servers were shut down in 2018 for consoles and 2019 for PC. The Lord of the Rings: The Third Age is a loose adaptation of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movie trilogy, with the main storyline of the game running parallel to the plot of the movies. The Third Age is a role-playing game with a turn-based combat system very similar to that of Final Fantasy X. The gameplay is divided into 2 different modes: linear exploration in the third person, and combat mode, which consists of turn-based gameplay. The combat was far from perfect, but it was generally fun, since it took the best elements of the conditional time battle from Final Fantasy X. In each battle, the player can have 3 active party members, with the ability to switch them freely in and out of combat. Although the game is set in the world of Peter Jackson's films and features the same key events, the player only controls characters that don't appear in the films. The missions and events are also specifically adapted to these conditions. Additionally, there are times when a well-known movie character temporarily enters the battle, but was only controllable for 1 or 2 battles. The highly cinematic elements were supported by great graphics and full voice acting, but many players found it difficult to connect with the characters and the storyline, indicating the lack of depth and weaknesses at these points. Although it's considered a commercial success back in 2004, The Third Age received mixed to positive reviews across all systems. The Lord of the Rings: Conquest is a 2009 action game based on the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy that adopts many gameplay mechanics from Star Wars Battlefront. Both games were developed by Pandemic Studios and published by Electronic Arts. The player takes on the role of a soldier of Rohan, Gondor, Mordor, or Isengard, depending on which campaign or side the player chooses. Similar to the system in Star Wars Battlefront, Conquest uses a class-based character system with 4 playable classes: Warrior, Archer, Scout, and Mage. The objective of the game is to defeat a certain number of enemies or hold a position until a timer expires. When a soldier dies, the game resumes from the point of death, which does not affect the storyline or flow of the game. However, players have a certain number of lives and must repeat the entire level when their lives are used up. The Lord of the Rings: Conquest was obviously developed with multiplayer in mind, but numerous connection and lag issues severely limited its potential. Besides the online matches, there is also a single-player mode, which is basically an offline version with the same gameplay mechanics and an additional story, driven mainly by clips from the movies. Ultimately, the game never had the success that EA had hoped for. Instead of fixing the problems, EA closed the Conquest Online servers in 2010, just a year after the game's release, leaving us with only a shallow single-player experience. The Lord of the Rings War in the North is a 2011 third-person action role-playing hack-and-slash video game based on both the books and films, with a bit of creative freedom sprinkled in. Although the game includes narrative elements that appear in both the novel and the movies, the aesthetic design is based more on the look of Peter Jackson's movies. The story follows a trio of adventurers whose quest parallels and occasionally overlaps with the main plot of the Fellowship. Their goal is to track down and defeat a powerful black Númenórean named Agandor, whom Sauron has charged with laying waste to the northern regions of Middle-earth. These characters are a ranger, dwarf, and an elf, each possessing a different skill set. The ranger is built around stealth, the dwarf is a master of melee combat, and the elf focuses on offensive and defensive magic. They can perform light and heavy attacks, roll, block, and sprint. While in the outdoors area, the player can summon a great eagle to aid them, which will prove to be a very valuable asset that has a great role in the following events. Besides the single player, there is also an online co-op mode for up to 3 players, each of whom controls one of the characters. This mode was a blast to play, as the synergy between the characters complemented each other perfectly. The graphics and tone were really good for the time, and War in the North was by no means a bad title. Criticisms were mainly related to the repetitive combat and somewhat weak storyline, as well as a potentially game-breaking bug in the middle of the game that could prevent you from progressing further. The main reason why it wasn't more popular is that the game's launch was overshadowed by several high-profile releases in the same period. Dark Souls, Uncharted 3, and especially the massive Skyrim were all released around that time, putting War in the North at a severe disadvantage in terms of sales and exposure. The LEGO video game series has a unique charm that appeals to players of all ages. The games are based on popular series such as Star Wars, Marvel, and DC Comics, and are known for their humor and lighthearted gameplay. LEGO The Lord of the Rings was released in 2012 and follows the plot from the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy, but the storylines have been adapted to fit events into multiple game chapters per movie. Music and voice acting are taken directly from all 3 films in the movie trilogy. The gameplay is a unique blend of one-button combat, puzzles, and platforming. You'll have to use your wits and strategic thinking to switch between multiple characters, each with their own special abilities, in order to progress through the levels. This experience is even more fun in co-op mode. There are over 80 playable characters in the game, including all the main protagonists. While the movies depicted huge epic battles, the combat in LEGO Lord of the Rings takes place on a smaller scale. That being said, there are still plenty of exciting battles to be found in the game, just on a smaller scale than what was seen in the movies. The main campaign consists of 18 levels and also features a free roam open-world version of Middle-earth that acts as a hub and links all the levels together. You will find most of the unlockable characters and items here. This open world can be explored by the player at will, thanks to a fast travel system that allows quick revisiting of previously explored areas. On your journey, you'll experience various boss battles in which you'll fight against Saruman, Balrog, and other memorable villains from the trilogy. LEGO The Lord of the Rings is a mesmerizing and fun experience, and many of the same features have been carried over to the next LEGO game set in Tolkien's fantasy world. LEGO The Hobbit was released in 2014 with gameplay that is almost identical to its predecessor. The main difference is of course the characters and the storyline, as we follow Bilbo Baggins, Gandalf, and a company of dwarves led by Thorin Oakenshield on their quest to reclaim the Kingdom of Erebor. The mining system is a new feature that lets you collect raw materials used for crafting, but this system felt more like a hindrance than a meaningful functionality. The graphics, lighting, and environment in LEGO The Hobbit have been somewhat improved compared to LEGO The Lord of the Rings. However, when it comes to LEGO The Hobbit, the main thing to keep in mind is that the storyline only covers the events of the first 2 movies, leaving out the Battle of the 5 Armies. The final DLC that was supposed to complete the Hobbit story was never released, and it was later revealed that there were no more plans to adapt the movie in any way. Considering all this, the game received mixed to positive reviews and is primarily intended for die-hard LEGO fans. Before we continue, if you like this video, please consider hitting that like button, subscribe if you are new to the channel, and enable all notifications by clicking the notification bell icon. The Lord of the Rings The Two Towers is a 2002 single-player hack-and-slash video game played from a third-person perspective. The game is an adaptation of the first 2 movies and features levels that are either taken directly from scenes of the Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers or are closely based on elements from these movies. And it really looks, sounds, and feels very close to the movies it is based on. EA has taken the licensing rights to the extreme and included a large number of clips from the movies between levels. You can play as Aragorn, Legolas, or Gimli, each with slightly different strengths and weaknesses. Upon completing the game with all three characters, the player can play through each level with Isildur. The game is heavily focused on action, and the light RPG system is there simply to give the player a sense of progression. Killing enemies earns experience points that can be used to unlock new and stronger combos. This system encourages players to experiment with different playstyles and find the one that best suits their preferences. Although some criticized the game for being too short and the battles as too repetitive, most of the positive feedback was directed to the faithful recreation of the sets and scenes from the movies and the epic size of some of the battles. The Two Towers was generally well received and proved to be a financial success in the end. The Lord of the Rings: The Battle for Middle-earth is a 2004 real-time strategy based on Peter Jackson's movie trilogy. The single-player mode has two campaigns, one for the good and one for the evil forces. The game follows the traditional RTS logistics, in which you collect resources and then use them to build military bases and armies on the spot. However, unique feature of the construction is that the buildings can only be constructed on the building slots of the predefined plots, ranging from farmhouses to full-fledged castles, with different slot arrangements and available buildings. In addition to basic army units that operate in groups, players have control over more powerful hero units. Heroes are unique, far more powerful units that represent iconic movie characters such as Gandalf, Aragorn, Gollum, and many others. During battles, units gain experience and levels, becoming tougher and more dangerous. Players can further strengthen their armies by purchasing upgrades for their units. Buildings also gain experience and automatically level up, unlocking new features. Common features of both Battle for Middle-earth games are online multiplayer matches and an excellent, unique turn-based mode called War of the Ring, in which matches are played in all areas of Middle-earth. In this game mode there is more strategic depth than in the skirmishes, since each area has its own bonuses and heroes and armies must be managed across the Middle-earth map. Players plan their moves and constructions on the map, and when two opposing armies land in the same area, they have the choice of either resolving the battle automatically or switching to real-time mode, which puts the players in a skirmish. Battle for Middle-earth is a really good strategy game, and according to Electronic Arts, it was a commercial success. The reviews and critics' reactions were quite positive, so it was no surprise that EA decided to develop a sequel. In 2006, riding on the success of its predecessor, Electronic Arts released the Battle for Middle-earth 2, which retained and expanded on the proven gameplay elements of its predecessor. The Battle for Middle-earth 2 introduces 3 new factions with unique units and heroes: goblins, dwarves, and elves. In addition, several elements from Tolkien's earlier novel The Hobbit are incorporated into the game, including characters such as the giant spiders from Mirkwood. The biggest change compared to the previous game is the move towards a more traditional RTS direction. Players can construct an unlimited number of buildings anywhere on the map, allowing more creative freedom in base building and unit production. The campaigns have some incredibly well-designed missions, and we can visit new locations like Mirkwood, Erebor, Dale, and Dol Guldur. In the same year, the game received an expansion pack called The Rise of the Witch King. The story follows the Witch King's ascent to power, his domination of Angmar, and the eventual invasion of Arnor, Aragorn's ancestral home. The Battle for Middle-earth 2 received generally positive reviews and was welcomed by the public. Unfortunately, all online services were discontinued in 2010 due to the expiration of the official license, and both games have been unavailable since then. The Lord of the Rings Online is an MMORPG for Microsoft Windows that was released back in 2007. Set in Tolkien's Middle-earth, the rich fantasy-themed universe is mainly inspired by the books of the Third Age. The world of Lotro is simply massive. All the iconic places, such as Rivendell, the Mines of Moria, and Helm's Deep, are locations that you can personally visit and explore to your heart's content. Since Lotro was developed a long time ago, it is based on traditional MMO systems, most notably the tap-target combat, which shows its age in modern times. The animations are slow and clunky, and other shortcomings can also be found in the outdated UI, inferior maps, and almost unusable instance finder. However, the biggest issue at the time of writing is lag, especially on the EU servers. It makes the game feel unresponsive and difficult to enjoy at times. Over the years, this has been repeatedly mentioned as one of the main problems that negatively affect players. Fortunately, the developers have recently announced that the culprit for this long-standing problem has been addressed, and the solution is on its way. Even though the game is technically free, if you are not willing to spend real money, you'll run into the inevitable gated content pretty quickly. It is beyond the scope of this video to explain all aspects of the Lotro store and the benefits of VIP membership, but the most important thing is that the game is accessible to everyone. The most loyal fans still play it precisely because of what it is, a slower-paced, relaxing MMO with massive, glorious environments of Middle-earth filled with the Lord of the Rings lore. In the end, the game is primarily suited for those who feel nostalgic for the traditional MMOs of the past and have a lot of time on their hands. Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor is a 2014 action-adventure video game developed by Monolith Productions and published by Warner Bros. The game takes place in the 60-year gap between the events of The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings movie trilogies. The player controls Talion, a Gondorian ranger who bonds with the spirit of the elf lord Celebrimbor as the two set out to avenge the deaths of their loved ones and fight the hordes of orcs. In the game, Talion can move through parkour, ride monsters, or go to forge towers that serve as fast travel points. Shadow of Mordor is a role-playing game at its core. It is played in the third person and is clearly influenced by Assassin's Creed and the Batman Arkham games. By completing quests, the player gets experience points, power, or in-game currency that can be used to unlock new abilities and equipment, forge new runes on weapons, and much more. There is no online co-op mode in Shadow of Mordor, but the game can create a vendetta mission for you when one of your online friends is killed by an orc captain. These missions will let you avenge your friend's death by killing that same enemy. However, the signature feature of both games is the Nemesis system, created to evolve the world around the player. The Nemesis system is responsible for monitoring the player's actions in the world and allows the NPCs to react and respond to these actions. In short, the game will begin tracking elite orcs that perform any notable actions within the game, such as killing the player or surviving an encounter with the player. These orcs have their own personalities and will rise or fall within their social structure as the game progresses. They will be affected by Talion's actions, and each of them will react differently to Talion's incursion into Mordor, whether by fighting, fleeing, or some other reaction. All of these interactions are vital to the story. Each death and respawn is justified by the dialogue, making the game feel like an interactive movie. The Nemesis system proved to be a great success, as Warner Bros. Patented it and now has exclusive rights to this unique game mechanic. Shadow of Mordor marked the biggest launch for a game based on Tolkien's universe and won multiple awards from video game publications, including Game of the Year. The game was very well received at its release, with great appreciation for its combat, open-world design, and Nemesis system. Shadow of Mordor received 2 DLCs, Lord of the Hunt, which was incredibly disappointing, and The Bright Lord, a much more rewarding package. In 2017, the sequel called Middle-earth: Shadow of War was released. The player continues the story of the Ranger Talion and the spirit of the elf lord Celebrimbor, who shares Talion's body as they forge a new ring of power to raise an army to fight Sauron. Shadow of War is more fleshed out than the first game. The Nemesis system has been improved, and combat is more fluid, with even more abilities and special moves to unlock. The map design also brought much-needed variety to the environment compared to the first game. Shadow of War introduced an online social conquest mode, which allows us to invade other players' worlds. Once you have your troops set up, you'll be able to attack other players' bases in both friendly and ranked modes. We also see a return of vendettas from the previous game. The game has received 2 DLC campaigns, Blade of Galadriel, a very short campaign without a Nemesis system, and the roguelike Desolation of Mordor. Shadow of War was generally well received by critics, although with more mixed reviews than its predecessor. The main criticism was directed at the grindy nature of the new mechanics introduced with the Nemesis system, as well as the inclusion of microtransactions and loot boxes, which were later removed from the game. Both Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War have shown that Tolkien's world can produce high-quality content without being directly connected to the events of the main story about the One Ring. The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King was released in 2003. It is an adaptation of the third Lord of the Rings movie and a direct sequel to The Two Towers, released a year earlier. The Return of the King took everything good from its predecessor and made it even more refined and detailed. The developers added multiple storylines, more playable characters, and more interaction with the environment. The graphics and audio were also improved and praised by the critics. As with The Two Towers, The Return of the King was developed in close collaboration with the filmmakers, using many of the actual reference photos, drawings, models, props, and other assets from the movie. As a result, the game has been considered one of the best movie-to-game conversions of all time. The gameplay is very similar to that of its predecessor. You'll use a combination of different attacks and combos to destroy a number of enemies, and at the end of each level you'll improve your character's abilities and combos using experience points. A major change from The Two Towers is the interactive nature of the game environment. To achieve objectives, the player can operate machinery, such as bridges and catapults, and use objects from the environment to kill enemies. The levels are also twice the size of the largest level from The Two Towers, and many of them are less linear. Unlike The Two Towers, The Return of the King has a well-received co-op mode that allows two players to play through the game together. Some minor complaints were directed at poor camera placement and unskippable cutscenes, as well as the relatively short game length. But in general, The Return of the King received mostly praise and positive reviews on all systems. So there you have it. Many thanks for watching, as we really hope you found this type of content helpful. So hit the like button if you did, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. Leave us a comment and let us know what you think. Until next time, have a ton of fun.